They left the paralyzed Apache woman to die, but the cowboy refused to walk away. The sun was already high in the sky when Naya realized she was truly alone. The land around her was wide and silent, stretching far beyond what her eyes could see. Dry wind moved slowly across the sand, carrying dust and the smell of heat. The mountains in the distance looked like shadows painted on the edge of the world. But nothing moved. Nothing spoke. Only the sun watched her, burning without mercy. Naya lay on the ground near a cluster of rocks, her body half in the shade, half in the light. She could not move her legs, no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much pain she pushed through. They stayed still. Her back felt like it was broken into pieces, each breath sending a dull ache through her chest. She had been strong once. She had walked these lands since she was a child. Now, even turning her head took all her strength. She remembered the voices from earlier that day, the hurried words, the fear, the cries of children, the sound of feet rushing through the dust. Something terrible had happened, something that had forced her people to leave in great haste. They had tried to carry her at first, but the journey was long and danger was close. Every step had slowed them down. In the end, they had stopped. She remembered the look in her sister's eyes, full of tears, full of pain, but also full of fear. Her people believed that staying would mean death for all of them. Leaving her behind was the hardest choice they had ever made. They gave her water, wrapped her in a blanket, and whispered prayers. Then they walked away. Naya had wanted to call out to them, to tell them not to go, to promise she would find a way to stand. But her voice was weak, and the dust swallowed her words. She watched their figures grow smaller until they disappeared into the heat. That was when the silence became real. Now, hours later, the world felt empty. She tried to move her fingers. They responded, slowly. That small victory gave her hope, even though the rest of her body refused to listen. She shifted her eyes toward the sky. The sun was too bright, so she closed them again. Her mouth was dry. The water they left her was almost gone, and she knew she had to save it. Time moved strangely. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. The heat pressed down on her, heavy and unkind. Flies buzzed near her face, and she lifted her hand weakly to push them away. Her blanket no longer felt like comfort. It felt like a weight holding her in place. Still, she kept it around her, because the desert could turn cold when night came. She thought of her mother who used to tell stories about the land and how it listened to those who respected it. Naya wanted to believe that. She whispered softly to the earth, asking it to hear her. She asked the wind to carry her words. She asked the sky to remember her. Her thoughts drifted in and out like waves. Sometimes she felt strong, certain she would survive. Other times fear wrapped around her chest so tightly she could hardly breathe. She did not know how long she could last. She did not know if anyone would find her. The desert did not care. The desert only waited. As the sun began to sink, the heat softened slightly, but the cold of fear grew. Shadows stretched longer, and the rocks around her looked like silent watchers. She pulled the blanket closer, though her hands trembled as she did. Her body felt tired in a way she had never known before. Not just tired of pain, but tired of fighting. She closed her eyes again, listening to her own breathing. Slow, weak, still there. Then she heard something different. At first she thought it was her imagination. A distant sound barely there, like thunder far away. She opened her eyes and listened carefully. The sound came again, steady, slow, and rhythmic. Hooves. Her heart jumped, sending a sharp pain through her chest, but she did not care. She tried to lift her head, but it only moved a little. The sound grew clearer. A horse. Someone was coming, but hope was dangerous. Many travelers passed through this land without ever seeing what lay beside the rocks. She forced herself to raise her hand, even though it felt like lifting a mountain. She waved weakly, her fingers barely moving in the air. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The hooves stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. For one terrible moment she thought the rider had turned away. She felt the hope drain from her, like water spilling into sand. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from the thought of being so close to rescue and losing it. Then she heard boots touch the ground. Slow footsteps moved closer, careful footsteps, like someone unsure of what they were about to find. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the last of the sunlight. She blinked, trying to focus, and saw the shape of a man standing over her, tall and still, his hat blocking the sky behind him. She could not see his face clearly, but she could tell he was staring at her, frozen in place. Maybe he thought she was already gone. Maybe he did not expect her eyes to open. But they did. Their eyes met, and something changed in the air. Naya tried to speak, but her throat was dry, her voice trapped inside her chest. All she could do was breathe and look at him, hoping he would understand that she was alive, that she was still here, that she was not ready to disappear into the sand. The man slowly knelt beside her. His movements were careful, gentle, as if he feared she might vanish if he moved too fast. He reached for the water bag beside her and lifted it, checking its weight. Then he looked at her again, his eyes full of something she had not seen all day. Concern. He poured a little water into the cap and held it to her lips. She drank, slowly, each drop feeling like life itself. The water ran down her chin, cool and real. She almost cried from the relief of it. He said something, but she could not hear the words clearly. His voice sounded low and calm, like the earth after a storm. She did not understand him, but she understood his tone. He was not afraid of her. He was not leaving. The sun slipped fully behind the mountains, painting the sky with soft colors. The day was ending, but for the first time since she had been left behind, Naya did not feel completely alone. She did not know who this man was, or why he had stopped, or what would happen next, but she knew one thing, deep in her heart, where fear had lived all day. Someone had seen her. The man stayed kneeling beside Naya for a long moment, as if he needed to be sure she was real. The desert was full of tricks. Heat and loneliness could make the eyes lie. But she was not a trick. She was breathing. She was alive, and she was looking at him with eyes that carried pain, fear, and a quiet strength he had not expected. Caleb Walker slowly placed the water bag back on the ground. He took off his hat, wiping the sweat from his forehead, and then looked at her again. He had been riding all day trying to reach the next camp before nightfall, when something had pulled his attention toward the rocks. At first, he had thought it was just a shadow. Then he saw her hand move. That small motion had made him stop without thinking. Now that he was closer, he could see how badly she was hurt. Her legs lay still, too, still, and her face was pale under the dust. He had seen many injured people in his life, but something about her made his chest feel tight. She had been left here, alone, in a place that did not forgive mistakes. "You're going to be okay," he said softly, though he was not sure it was true. He said it anyway because she needed to hear it. Naya did not understand the words, but she understood the kindness. She watched his face carefully. He was young, but the lines around his eyes showed that life had not been easy for him either. His clothes were worn, his boots dusty, and his hands rough from work. But when he moved, he was gentle, like someone who knew how easily things could break. Caleb looked around, scanning the land, checking the horizon. Night was coming fast, and this place was not safe. He could not leave her here. He knew that. The thought of riding away made his stomach turn. Still, he hesitated. Helping her would slow him down. It would put him at risk. And people would talk. But none of that mattered as much as the fact that she was breathing. He pulled his canteen from his belt and offered her more water. This time, she drank a little more, her hand shaking as she held it. He noticed how hard it was for her even to lift her arm. That told him everything. She was not going anywhere without help. "All right," he whispered to himself, making the decision he already knew he would make. "We'll figure this out." He stood up and quickly gathered dry wood from nearby bushes. The sun had almost disappeared and the air was already cooling. Using a small flint, he started a fire not far from where she lay, just enough to bring light and warmth. The flames danced, chasing the darkness back for a little while. Naya watched the fire, feeling safer, even though her body still hurt. Caleb took off his coat and carefully placed it over her blanket, adding another layer to protect her from the night. She looked at him, confused, wondering why a stranger would give her warmth when he barely knew her. He gave her a small smile, though he was not sure she understood it. He sat beside the fire, keeping watch, listening to the sounds of the desert. Every crack of a branch, every distant call made him turn his head. He did not want anything or anyone to come near her. This was his responsibility now, whether he liked it or not. Hours passed slowly. Naya drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes she dreamed of her people walking ahead, their backs turned, disappearing into the distance. Other times she dreamed of water, cool and endless. Each time she opened her eyes, the fire was still there, and so was the man. That gave her peace she had not felt since morning. When the night grew colder, Caleb moved closer to the fire and kept adding small pieces of wood. He was not used to sitting still. His life had been made of riding, working, moving from one place to another. But tonight, he stayed. He felt like the desert itself was testing him, asking what kind of man he truly was. At one point he spoke again, mostly to fill the silence. He told her his name. "Caleb," he said, tapping his chest. She listened carefully and nodded, trying to remember it. Then she whispered her own name, her voice so soft it was almost carried away by the wind. "Naya," she said. He repeated it slowly. "Naya." The name sounded strong, like the land itself. He liked the way it felt when he said it. The fire burned low as the night stretched on. Stars filled the sky, bright and endless. Caleb looked up and thought about the road he was supposed to be on. The cattle drive, the men waiting for him, the work he might lose. But then he looked at Naya again, her face calm in sleep, and he knew he could not leave. When the first light of morning touched the horizon, Caleb stood and stretched his stiff legs. He had not slept much, but he felt clear in his mind. He knelt beside Naya and gently touched her shoulder. "We need to move," he said softly, though he knew she could not walk. He had no plan yet, only the promise he had made, without words. He would not let her stay here. He began preparing. He packed his supplies, tied his horse closer, and checked the ground around her. He knew he would need to build something, a small bed, a drag, anything that could help him carry her. It would take time. It would take effort, but he had already chosen. Naya watched him work, her heart beating faster with a mix of fear and hope. She did not know where he would take her. She did not know if she would survive the journey. But for the first time since she had been left behind, she was not facing the future alone. As the sun rose fully, warming the cold air, Caleb returned to her side and knelt again. He looked into her eyes, steady and sure. "I'm not leaving," he said, and even though she did not understand the words, she understood the truth behind them. The desert, which had been silent and cruel the day before, now seemed to watch them closely, as if it too was waiting to see how far one man's choice would go. The morning light spread slowly across the desert, turning the sand soft gold. The air was still cool, but the heat was already waiting. Caleb stood beside his horse, thinking hard, his eyes moving from the animal to Naya and then to the open land ahead. He had no wagon, no rope strong enough for a real stretcher, and no help, but he had his hands, his time, and a promise he had made without speaking. He pulled a blanket from his pack and laid it flat on the ground. Then he tied 2 long branches to each side, making a simple drag that could slide across the sand. It was not perfect, but it was the best he could do. When he was ready, he knelt beside Naya again, speaking slowly, calmly, as if his voice alone could make things easier. "I'm going to move you now," he said. She looked afraid, but she nodded. Trust was growing between them not because of words, but because of his actions. He moved carefully, lifting her as gently as he could. Every small movement made her face tighten in pain, and Caleb felt it like a weight on his chest. When she was finally settled, he covered her well and made sure her head was supported. The first pull was the hardest. The drag resisted the sand, and his muscles burned as he leaned forward, pulling with all his strength. Step by step they moved, slowly, quietly. The desert seemed endless, but he kept going, stopping often to let her drink water and to let his arms rest. Hours passed like this. The sun climbed high, and sweat ran down Caleb's face, stinging his eyes. His hands grew sore, his back ached. But each time he looked at Naya, he reminded himself why he was doing this. She watched the sky as they moved, her eyes following clouds that barely moved at all. Sometimes she closed her eyes, letting the motion carry her, trusting that he would not let her fall. By midday the heat was heavy and unforgiving. Caleb stopped near a group of rocks that offered a little shade. He set down his pack and gave Naya water, wiping her face with a cloth soaked in cool drops from his canteen. She whispered something in her own language, a soft sound that felt like thanks even if he did not understand the words. They rested longer than he planned. The heat was dangerous, and he knew pushing too hard could cost them both. He sat nearby, chewing on dried food and watching the land. In the distance, dust moved with the wind. He did not know if it was animals, people, or nothing at all. Out here, everything looked the same until it was too late. As the sun began to lower, he pulled the drag again. They moved slower now, but they moved. Every step felt like a small victory. The desert was not kind, but it was honest. It showed you exactly what you were up against. That night he made camp again, building a small fire and cooking what little food he had. He shared it with Naya, breaking pieces and helping her eat. The stars came out bright and endless, filling the sky like scattered light. The fire popped softly, and for a moment the world felt calm. Naya tried to speak more, using her hands, her eyes, her soft voice. Caleb listened carefully, nodding, smiling, answering in his own simple way. They laughed once, quietly, at a misunderstanding. That small laugh felt like hope taking shape. Days passed like this. Each morning they moved a little farther. Each night they rested and healed in small ways. Caleb learned how to lift her without causing too much pain. He learned how much water she needed. He learned the signs when she was too tired to go on. And she learned his patience, his stubborn strength, and his quiet kindness. But the desert never made things easy. One afternoon, dark clouds rolled in, fast and sudden. The wind rose, sharp and loud, carrying sand that stung the skin and burned the eyes. Caleb rushed to protect Naya, turning the drag sideways and using his body to block the worst of the wind. He wrapped her tighter in blankets and pulled his coat over them both. Sand beat against them like rain, and the sky disappeared. For a long time they waited like that, pressed close, the storm howling around them. Naya could feel his heart pounding through his chest, strong and steady. It gave her courage. When the storm finally passed, the land looked different, like it had been wiped clean. They kept going. Caleb's supplies grew smaller. His water was running low. His horse grew tired too, but turning back was not an option. Somewhere ahead, there had to be help. He believed that as strongly as he believed in the rising sun. One morning, Naya woke with a fever. Her skin was hot, her breathing shallow. Caleb felt fear like a cold stone in his stomach. He cooled her with water, shaded her, and spoke to her even when she could not answer. He told her stories about places he had seen, about rivers and towns and wide green fields, hoping his voice would keep her tied to the world. For 2 days, they did not move. He stayed beside her, barely sleeping, watching every breath. When she finally opened her eyes clearly again, he felt his knees weaken with relief. "You scared me," he said, smiling, his voice shaking. She did not know the words, but she smiled back, and that was enough. By the end of the week, the land began to change. The ground grew firmer, and the air smelled different, less dry, more alive. Caleb felt hope rise in his chest. They were closer now. He could feel it. That evening, as they made camp, Naya reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak but steady. She held it for a long moment, looking into his eyes with deep meaning. In that simple touch, Caleb understood something important. This was no longer just about saving a life. It was about honoring it. The land changed more with each passing day, but the journey became harder instead of easier. Caleb could feel it in his bones. His body was tired in a way rest could not fix. His hands were rough and cracked, his shoulders burned, and his legs shook when he stood too long. Still, every morning he woke before the sun and prepared to move again, because stopping for too long was dangerous. They were close to people now. He could sense it. The open desert slowly gave way to low bushes, scattered trees, and firmer ground. That should have made things easier, but it also meant more eyes, more questions, and more trouble. One morning, as they moved along a narrow trail, the sound of hooves approached from behind. Caleb stopped immediately and stepped in front of Naya without thinking. 3 riders came into view, their faces serious, their eyes sharp. They looked at Naya lying on the drag, then at Caleb, then at each other. The silence was heavy. "What are you doing out here?" one of them asked. Caleb answered calmly. He explained that she was hurt and that he was taking her to a safe place. The men exchanged looks. One of them shook his head slowly. "That's not your problem," the man said. "You should turn back. You're asking for trouble." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. He could feel Naya watching from behind him. "She's a person," he said, "and she needs help." The rider stayed silent for a long moment. Then, without another word, they turned their horses and rode away. The dust they left behind hung in the air like a warning. Caleb did not move until they were gone. When he finally turned back to Naya, his heart was still racing. That night, he barely slept. The next day, they reached the edge of a small settlement. A few buildings stood together, old and worn. Smoke rose from one of them. Caleb felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. As he pulled Naya closer, people stepped out to watch. Their faces showed surprise, confusion, and fear. Some whispered, some turned away. No one came forward. Caleb asked for water. A woman finally stepped out and handed him a bucket, but she did not come close. Her eyes stayed on Naya, uncertain, unsure. Caleb thanked her anyway. They rested near the edge of the settlement. Caleb fed Naya and gave her water. She looked at the buildings, at the people, and then back at him. He could tell she felt unsafe. He did not blame her. The air felt heavy with unspoken things. Before sunset, a man came forward, older than the others, his hair gray, his steps slow but firm. He looked at Naya, then at Caleb. "You can't stay here," he said, not unkindly but not softly either. "You should move on." Caleb nodded. He had expected this. "Where is the nearest place with real help?" he asked. The man pointed toward the distant hills. "A mission. 2 days from here, if you're strong." Caleb thanked him and turned back to his work without another word. That night he made camp away from the settlement, under the open sky. Naya barely slept. Neither did he. The next 2 days felt longer than all the days before. The road climbed slowly, winding through hills and rocky paths. The drag caught on stones, and Caleb had to lift it again and again. His arms felt like fire. His breath came short. His water was nearly gone. But he kept moving step by step, telling himself that stopping meant losing everything they had fought for. On the second afternoon, he saw the building on a hill. White walls. A small tower. Cross. The mission. He laughed out loud, the sound surprising even himself. Naya lifted her head and followed his gaze. When she saw it, her eyes filled with tears. She did not cry, but her hands trembled as she reached for him. They were almost there, but the road was not finished with them yet. A group of men blocked the path near the mission gate. They looked at Caleb with hard eyes. One of them stepped forward and asked questions. Caleb answered honestly, his voice steady even though his body was failing him. He could feel the weight of every step he had taken pressing down on him now. The men argued quietly among themselves. Time stretched. The sun moved lower. Finally, one of them stepped aside. "Bring her in," he said. Caleb felt his legs give slightly, but he held himself up. He pulled the drag forward, passing through the gate. People came running. Voices filled the air. Hands reached out to help. Someone lifted Naya carefully, placing her on a bed inside. The cool shade swallowed them both. Caleb stood there, suddenly unsure what to do. He had carried her this far, but now others had taken over. His work was done. The thought felt strange, empty. A man placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did good," he said simply. Caleb nodded, but his throat was tight. He watched as they carried Naya deeper inside. Before she disappeared, she turned her head and looked at him. Their eyes met one last time in the doorway, and in that look he saw something that made every step, every pain, every fear worth it. She was alive. The quiet inside the mission felt strange to Caleb. After so many days of wind, sand, and open sky, the stone walls made everything sound smaller, softer. Voices echoed gently in the halls. The smell of clean water and warm food filled the air. He stood near the doorway, his body finally feeling how tired it truly was. Naya lay on a simple bed, clean blankets wrapped around her. Someone had washed the dust from her face and hair. Her breathing was calm now, slow and steady. When her eyes opened and found Caleb standing there, she felt something warm settle in her chest. She was safe. She was not alone anymore. People moved around them, careful and quiet. A woman brought water. Another checked Naya's injuries with gentle hands. They spoke in calm voices, saying words Caleb did not fully understand, but their actions told him everything. They were trying to help her, really help her. Caleb stepped back, giving them space. His hand shook slightly now that he had nothing left to do. For days, he had lived only to move forward, only to protect, only to keep her alive. Now that the danger was behind them, his strength faded all at once. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and breathed. That night, he slept on the floor near the doorway. It was the deepest sleep he had known in a long time. When morning came, sunlight poured through the small window, lighting the room softly. Caleb woke slowly, confused for a moment, until he saw Naya lying there, still breathing, still alive. A quiet smile touched his face. The people at the mission told him that her injuries would never fully heal, but she could live. She would learn to sit, to work with her hands, to move in new ways. The road ahead would be hard, but it would not be empty. Caleb listened, nodding, feeling both relief and sadness at the same time. He went outside to wash his face, watching the day begin. Birds moved between trees. A bell rang softly in the distance. Life was going on, as if nothing had happened. It felt strange that the world had not stopped for what they had been through. Days turned into weeks. Caleb stayed near the mission, working small jobs for food and a place to sleep. He fixed fences, carried supplies, helped wherever he could. He told himself he was only staying until he was strong enough to leave. But each day, he found another reason to stay. Naya slowly learned her new life. At first she was quiet, watching everything, learning the rhythms of the place. Then she began to speak more, using simple words, using her hands, using her eyes. The people listened. They started to ask her questions about her land, her people, her stories, and she began to tell them. Children gathered around her in the afternoons. She told them stories of the desert, of the wind, of the stars that guided travelers home. Her voice was soft but strong, and when she spoke, people listened. She was no longer the woman left behind. She was the woman who survived. Caleb often sat nearby fixing something or pretending to work, listening to her voice. Did not always understand her words, but he understood her strength. He saw the way her eyes shone when she spoke, the way her hands moved with purpose. She was building a life again, piece by piece. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, she asked him to come closer. He sat beside her, and for a moment they said nothing. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of memories. "You didn't leave," she said slowly, choosing each word carefully. He smiled. "I couldn't." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. That was all that needed to be said. Years passed quietly. Caleb never returned to the road he once walked. He built a small home near the mission, simple and strong, like the life he wanted. He worked the land, fixed things, helped people who needed it. He had learned that staying could be braver than leaving. Naya became known for her stories. Travelers stopped to listen. People remembered her words. They remembered the lesson hidden in them, that life could change in one moment, but kindness could change it again. Sometimes in the evenings, they sat together and watched the sky. The same sky that had once watched her alone now watched them in peace. The desert still stretched beyond the hills, wide and endless, but it no longer felt cruel. One day a child asked Caleb why he had stopped that first afternoon, why he had not ridden past like others did. He thought for a long time before answering. "Because I saw someone who needed me," he said simply. Naya heard him and smiled.